There are more and more people who no longer even pretend to be guided by what once would have been called moral boundaries. People have value only inasmuch as they are successful, an attribute measured in terms of power and money. The primary value of other people is what they can do for me. Money and power are opposite sides of the same coin. Power is understood as what comes from money. The amalgamation of politics and religion is not a new thing. More than 3,000 years ago, according to the Hebrew Bible, or the Old Testament, Saul was anointed as the first king of Israel. The story goes that the people approached Samuel, one of the early charismatic leaders, judges of Israel, and begged for a king to be appointed. God's advice to Samuel was, "Listen to the voice of the people and all they say to you, for they have not rejected you, but they have rejected me from being king over them. Just as they have done to me from the day I brought them out of Egypt to this day, forsaking me and seeking other gods, so also they are doing to you." Samuel tried to talk the people out of it. He warned them of the burden that would come with a king. He told them of their loss of liberty, the sacrifice of their sons as soldiers that would be inevitable. But the people insisted. "We are determined to have a king over us so that we also may be like other nations, and our king may govern us and go out before us and fight our battles." Perhaps it is reading a bit between the lines, but it's not so difficult to see the demand for a king arising out of a desire to share in the wealth of the world around them. They wanted a piece of it. That prosperity came with a cost was easily ignored. That's not so unusual. From the anointing of Saul until today, there has been present in the political structure of most of the world some notion of divine participation in the selection of those who rule the world. The theology of kingship has been sometimes stronger and sometimes less evident, but it has always been the assumed justification of the right to govern. The divine right of kings was the norm of the Middle Ages, and even today it is the Archbishop of Canterbury who places the crown on the head of the ruling monarch of England. I even read one evangelical religious leader who attributed the election of Donald Trump in 2016 to the fact that God showed up. That mixture of religion and politics has always been a mixed bag. Thomas Jefferson and John Madison, among many others of the early founders of the country, framers of the Constitution, had grave concerns about combining church and state. They saw there the danger of undermining the republic they had sought to create. The articulation of the doctrine of manifest destiny insisted that it was God who gave the settlers of the so-called New World the right and holy obligation for claiming Texas, Southern California, Arizona, and New Mexico from the country of Mexico. Manifest destiny was the justification for the removal of indigenous people from any land of value, almost to the point of extinction. The divine creation of slavery was preached from pulpits across the South as a thin veil over the motive of profit and prosperity for a few from the misery of many. No, the mixture of politics and religion is not a new thing. What is new is that in the last 50 years or so, there has been a gradual lessening of any remnant of the foundational pillars of any recognizable religion in defense of political actions. It is far less often that politics seeks religious justification for its actions in pursuit of power than it is that politics itself is the justification. There is still an occasional nod and tip of the hat to God, but they grow steadily fainter and less relevant. Politics has become the religion. That is not true for all people, maybe not even for most people. But it is a growing reality. It is more acceptable to more people. It is no longer that religion seeks to inform and shape politics. It's hard to argue that religion provides a conscience for politics. It is becoming more likely that politics defines and shapes religion. There was a general sigh of relief among Democrats after the recent midterm elections, when many of the most extreme candidates were not elected. There were comments that democracy had won, the nation had been preserved. But it is still true that most elections were won or lost by razor-thin margins. We are still a divided people, divided by politics. There are more and more people who no longer even pretend to be guided by what once would have been called moral boundaries. The ultimate god of the religion of politics is money. Money has always been a challenge to spiritual health. Moses' brother Aaron fashioned an idol from gold because the people were scared. In the misery of slavery in Egypt, the notion of freedom was inspiring. In the reality of the desert without food or water, they quickly lost their faith in God's attention and care. They were vulnerable. They were powerless. They needed some idol, some god they could control. They wanted a talisman that would give them power. The temptation is always to trust the power and wealth. The real point of the story of the golden calf is not the unfaithfulness of the followers of Moses, but rather that it didn't work. The idol couldn't deliver on the promise. And yet we so quickly accept the proposition that money will bring security and the ability to control our own destiny. Jesus said to a rich young ruler, "Sell everything you have, give the money to the poor, and then come and follow me." Really? You have the promise of youth, a lifetime ahead of you. You have the resources to buy anything you want. You have the power to tell other people what to do. Give it all away and follow someone whose primary message seems to be love and forgiveness. Really? There must be something symbolic going on here. He couldn't have meant literally what he said. The conflict between money and the soul is not a new thing. It is a tension that will always be a part of the life of anyone who cares about others. Money in some form will always be necessary to sustain life. There is nothing spiritually rewarding about abject poverty. There are perhaps boundaries, but those boundaries are not clear or stable. It's a lifelong struggle. What is new is that for some there is no moral struggle. There is no universally accepted notion that there is something called enough when it comes to wealth. Money is not a means to an end. Money is the end. Money is the value. There is no apology offered, none needed. It is money that gives meaning and purpose to life. Right and wrong are no longer concepts by which we evaluate the ways in which we get money or what we do with it. Right and wrong are determined by the money itself. What produces money is right, what does not is wrong. The heroes of the religion of politics are the billionaires of the world. It is they upon whom the gods have smiled. Money and power are opposite sides of the same coin. Power is understood as what comes from money. Money gives me the ability to do whatever I want. Power looks and feels liberating especially if there is no distinction between good and bad ways to obtain power. As with money, the morality of power is defined by power itself. What brings power is good. What limits power is bad. There's a whole body of what might be called ethics that flows from the politics of money and power. The fact that the vast majority of the people in the world live in poverty is irrelevant and easily ignored. The self is greatly exalted as a value. Self-centeredness and selfishness are not character flaws to be grappled with and taken seriously. They are assets. They are character traits to be admired and emulated. A valid question in establishing priorities is what's in it for me. The idea that all people are of equal value is a foolish fantasy. People have value only inasmuch as they are successful, an attribute measured in terms of power and money. The primary value of other people is what they can do for me. Empathy, the ability and willingness to feel the feelings of others, is the result of a failure of willpower. Sympathy, a sense of sorrow and regret for the plight of someone else, is ignored as the crying of bleeding heart do-gooders. You must be strong to make it in the world. The righteousness of any feeling or action is determined by its ability to produce wealth and power. How else is it possible to ignore the reality of children in this country who go to bed hungry or even starving? How is it possible for any country to be great when the gap between the rich and the poor grows wider each day? Of course, it's not that simple. It's not so black and white or neat and tidy as I have described it. If we were to describe a continuum with one extreme defined by the religion of politics and the other by a religion that could be defined as a religion of love, or that of a loving God who values mercy, sacrifice, and universal brotherhood, there would be few, if any at all, on either extreme of the continuum. We are all somewhere in between. The most faithful Christian struggles with both greed and fear. Somewhere, even in the heart of the Grinch, there is a spark, however faint, of love that struggles to be fanned into flame. I am no exception. I have no position of moral high ground from which to judge others. I am rich by any world standard, and I still sometimes fantasize about winning the lottery. Justice is a challenge for me when it costs something, which it always does, and I cannot read the hearts and the minds of others. And that's not the point. In the past 30 years or so, there has been a clear movement along the continuum toward the opposite ends. There's a separation in this country that is becoming more and more evident. We are holding fundamentally opposite values. We are arming ourselves to the point that there are now more guns in this country than there are people. It grows more and more difficult to bridge the gap. We are facing off as enemies. Where it leads, where it ends, is not yet clear. Even less clear is what, if anything, is to be done about it. I hope to explore that further in the next couple of episodes.